Hey, welcome to our first session for this Illustrator course where we're going to take a look real quickly under the hood of Illustrator and view our preferences in order to make Illustrator work a little bit better for us and let our computer behave better, run more smoothly, these sort of things. But also, like, preferences are things that we prefer. So you might like certain colors better, different light treatments. So part of it is just making sure that it works for you, and part of it is making sure that it just works good. And also has some troubleshooting aspects to it. I'll try to make this as delightful as possible because it's such a boring topic. Your preferences, once you open up Illustrator, are going to be found under the Illustrator name up on the menu bar. And this is going to be different if you're on a PC. I believe that the preferences on a PC are found under the Edit menu. So you might find your preferences in Edit, maybe File, but somewhere up in there. All right. When you do find preferences, there are a whole bunch of different sub menus for it, but all you have to do is just get to General, and when you open up General, here are those subcategories. So once your preference window opens, you can jump through any of those that you want. But if you knew specifically you wanted something, I'll just cancel out of that real quick, to jump to, your user interface or something, you can just do that directly from the menu. So I'm not going to go over everything because that's just crazy, and there's a lot of things that even I don't really understand how they impact our work. But right off the bat, under General, there's something called keyboard increments, and that is if you're using your arrow keys on your keyboard to like nudge elements around. How great of a nudge do you want that to be? And it just starts off by 1 pixel, and that's perfect. We'll talk about nudging and things later and how you can actually customize that while you work. And then there's constraint angle. Just leave that at 0. It's kind of just nonsense right now. Corner radius, if you choose a rounded rectangle as a shape, what's the default radius? This is a radius of 12 pixels right now, but you can change that all the time while you are actually working and creating artwork. So I don't think we need to even think about that. Disable auto add or delete. This is while you're creating a path with a pen tool. Do you want that little pen tool to automatically give you the options of adding points along a path or deleting them? We'll get into this in more detail once we actually start dealing with paths, so it doesn't really make sense if this is new to you right now. But it's a good thing to just leave it unchecked because it just saves you some trouble. If you're going to use a tool, I'll just hit OK and get out of here real quick. Like, let's just say the brush. See how my little icon looks like a paintbrush and it has a little tiny asterisk next to it. Some people get confused as where this path will be originating from per the tool itself. So they put that in there as something where you can say use precise cursors, and now instead of the brush icon I have an X, and that'll help me understand exactly where my points will be laid down or my path will be created. So that's something that you can change right there in preferences using precise cursor. But there's a shortcut to it. If you just hit caps lock on your keyboard, it automatically goes to the precise cursor. So just little things that I'll be helping you figure out along the way. Tool tips are always great. If you hover over something, it won't work right now because I'm in preferences, but it'll give you a little pop-up window that says this is what the tool is, or this is what this setting means or indicates. It's pretty great. Leave that on. However, if we're talking about computer performance and you have a sluggish machine, things like this would be good to turn off. That way your machine doesn't have to process more information than it needs to. So if you feel confident, you know what the brush is, or you know what these things mean, you could turn off tooltips, and it'll be one less thing that your program has to, negotiate with your RAM and your memory, and or I guess RAM is memory, processor, that sort of thing. What else is worth looking at in here? If you close any documents and nothing is open, this is just, you want that startup screen to pop up. It's kind of nice to have it there as an option. So, but if it bugs you, you can come in here and you can just turn that thing off. There are going to be some files that you are going to be opening for this course that are going to be legacy files, older ones. And what's nice about this is that it'll allow you to work with older files, and it will append them. Let's turn them into a converted document, just as to where it won't. It'll give you the chance to save it as something new with a contemporary format for whatever version of Illustrator you are running. Okay, the last one would be scale, strokes, and effects. This is handy, but also can drive you crazy at times. So like right now, it's set, it's check marked, and if I have my brush stroke that I just created here, if I select it and I look at my properties, it tells me that this is a stroke and it's 1 point thick, right? And that's how thick my stroke is. I'll beef that up to like 5 so we can actually see it. So it's a 5-point stroke on this path. If I was to scale this path up, make it larger, it also scales up the stroke weight. So now my stroke is 12.52. This, like I said, is handy, but sometimes it's something you don't want to happen. So if I turned off scale, stroke, and effects, and I did that same transformation, we'll see that that stroke maintains its weight at 5 points. And that is also very handy for certain points throughout your design work. I'm just going to get rid of you. And all right, so I'll just leave that up there. Selection and anchor display. Tolerance is how far away from a point can you click and still get that little point, little dot, the little tiny thing that makes vector art what it is. The tolerance for me right now is set at 3. That means that I've got 3 pixels around the perimeter of a point, to where if I click and I'm not actually on that point, it'll still say, okay, I get it. I'm going to let you select that point. You can increase your tolerance if you just have a hard time getting those points selected. Then come into your preferences and increase that. Try doubling it. See if 6 works. If that's still too small of a radius, then try 10. Object selection, my path only snap the point. These are all fine. I'm not going to talk about this business. Zoom to selection is cool if you have something selected and you start to zoom in with your magnifying glass tool, or with the keyboard command of Command plus. It knows that whatever is selected, that's what you kind of want to focus on. So that's handy, but it also could drive you nuts, so you can come here and turn that off. We're just gonna move on. Moving on. There are some type preferences here that I'm not even going to talk about. Units. Generally, we want to work with pixels, but you could set that to inches if you work more for like print. But our default is set to pixels. I like pixels, but there are times when I need to change my document to inches because I'm thinking about print. It's really easy to do, and we'll talk about that later too. Points for stroke it makes sense. And points for type also makes sense. So just leave that there. Guides and grids. This is where you're kind of talking about things to make it work for you better. Like right now, my guides are set to cyan, and they are going to be lines. So I'll show you what this is going to do. If I was to bring a guide in, I just dragged one off of my ruler. You can see there's this new vertical line here. It's a way for me to, set up my design, make sure things are in vertical alignment, and deal with things like placement and consistency. But this might not, just depending on my vision or depending on the background color of things. Like if I put the guide over, well, they still show up pretty well. They just don't show up well on white. You can change this in your preferences, guides, and say, well, I'd like it to be red or something. And instead of a line, I want dots. And now those guides will be red and they'll have dots, just so that maybe the dots are less intrusive and the red stands out more and I can actually see it better. So that's what's going on here. I'm just going to put it back to cyan and lines. So it's circumstantial. You might be working on a design where most of your color is cyan, and a guide that is also cyan is not going to really work. So you can come in and change it. Grid is another thing that a lot of people like to pull up, which is grid. Show the grid. There's my grid. It's kind of like a graphing paper sort of thing. It's also helpful for you while you design to think about, distance and placement of things so that they are, consistent and proper. But the grid, if it's not showing up the way you want it to, you can set up the color. You can set up how many subdivisions there are, for every inch. Etc. I don't like the grid. I rarely ever use it, but it doesn't matter. Smart guides are just another thing we'll talk about later, but you can change them here. Slices if we're doing web work and cutting up our thing. Hyphenations, junk. Plugins and scratch disks. If you have extra hard drives in your machine, maybe one of them is an SSD instead of a spinning disk. You could point your scratch disk to work with a better performing drive. Basically, scratch disk is where all that temporary data is going to be stored while you work in between saving things. It's something you rarely ever have to deal with. But if you're running out of space and you got a lot of junk on your hard drive that's your primary, you might get a warning while you're in the middle of a big project that says, hey man, you just ran out of scratch disk space and our computer program is going to crash and you're going to risk losing your work, or change your scratch disk to something else. So if you have a disk that has a lot of room that is probably not going to get eaten up, then I would probably recommend right now changing your scratch disk to the hard drive that you have that has the most room. And removable hard drives are not a good idea here. It's got to be something that's actually in your machine. And user interface, how dark do you like it? How light do you like it? Oh my God, it's so bright. I'm like dying. But this is what Illustrator used to look like up to about 5 years ago, before they got smart and started to tone down the values. I think by default it's this gray, but you could go even darker. Does a couple things for you. Helps you focus on your work, lets colors pop a little bit more, and your eyes aren't distracted or strained by excessive illumination. So the darker ones are definitely, going to probably make everyone's life a little bit easier. It just depends on how dark you want to go. And this is all fine. Performance-wise, you can learn about your graphics card here and how much work Illustrator will benefit from with that graphics card. You can always click on more info and it'll tell you that, but you definitely do want to use your GPU performance. The animated zoom is just something where, like, instead of clicking to zoom in, you can sort of click and drag and it animates, but it's a performance thing, and it might make your computer and software just kind of really clunky. You can turn that off, and that'll help the performance of your system just kind of increase. File handling and clipboard. Do you want to have automatic save? Yeah, you sure do. I don't know why mine is not set. But man, it sucks losing work, and it's so great that they finally included this in so many programs with Adobe. How often do you want to save? This is something, the more often it's going to save, the more it's going to be using your machine to have to think in the background. So if you're trying to, make your, streamline your performance, you could set this so that it saves every, 30 minutes or something like that. I think for me, I'm going to set mine to 5. I don't know what this little guy's telling me. Oh, it's going to take change after I restart Illustrator. So that's one of those things where if you change it, it won't actually happen until I quit and then relaunch it. Number of recent files in your window deal, 20 is a lot, but that's cool. It's fine. Where is my level of undos? Did I skip over that? Maybe that's in performance. There it is. Yeah, it's back in performance. How many undos? 100, and it's so great. I love that Illustrator can handle 100 undos. You can even go up to 200, but it's really nice if you're just like, shoot, what I've just been working on is not happening. I need to go back to where I was like 5 minutes ago. You just sit there and hit Command Z again and 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 again, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that's where we're good. But this also uses up RAM and memory. So, if you're struggling, you don't have a lot of RAM in your computer, you can bump that down to 50, and that'll help your performance. Appearance of black, this is a printing thing, really, but it's helpful for us while we work on a pixel display. There's this thing about a rich black that is part of the printing world, where you're including a little bit of cyan, magenta, and yellow with the black in order to make it rich and like really great. Otherwise, if it's just black, it tends to, first of all, oversaturate and can bleed or smear on paper once something's printed. But it also just might have the appearance of it being a little bit gray. So you just want to make sure that everything here is set to rich black, and that's a default. You should open that up and just Illustrator knows that that's what it should be, but you could change it if you needed to. So those are the preferences, and it is about performance, and it is about your own personal preference of how you like things or how your vision is, etc. So it's something that definitely shouldn't be overlooked, but we're not creating anything yet. We're just looking at stupid settings. I hope that helped, and we'll carry on with some more interesting stuff in our next videos. Thanks.